Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we will dive into a topic of Azure Active Directory, also known as Entra ID. We will explore the key concepts, including what a tenant is and how it works. Let's get started. We will start understanding what exactly the tenant is. In simple words, an Azure tenant is like your organization account or container in the Microsoft Cloud. It holds all your users, application, and services in one secure place. Think of it as your company's private workspace in Microsoft ecosystem. So for example, imagine a big office building where each company has its own floor. This is a organization or the office building. This building represents as a Azure, a complete Azure. So there are floors in this building which has the different organizations. Organization A, organization B, organization C. Each company floor is like a tenant. This is different tenant, this is different tenant, this is different tenant. Separate, different, and managed by their own. So this organization can manage all of the resources in this tenant, not all the Azure. So tenant is a unique identifier in the Azure. Each tenant is uniquely identified by a GUID called as a tenant ID, and it creates the isolation in the Azure cloud. A tenant is fully isolated from the other tenants, ensuring the data security and the privacy. So in very simple word, tenant is a unique identity in the Azure cloud, and it represents your organization where you can attach the custom domains, create resources, create users, create authentication, everything. It is a unique identity for your organization in the whole Azure cloud, and everything you need to manage you will be doing in a tenant. So whenever you sign up for the Azure Active Directory, you will be signing up for the tenant that will give you a unique identity and space where you can manage your organization with all the Azure resources, providing the identity and access management, network capabilities, everything in Azure you are doing in a tenant. So whenever you have to deal with the Azure tenant, let me show you how. You need to go to the Azure portal. So opening the portal.azure.com. You can search for the Entra ID. Entra ID is the new name, previously known as the Azure Active Directory. Then you need to navigate to the properties. So whenever you sign up for the Azure, a default directory is set up automatically and a tenant ID has been provided. So this is how the default directory is created whenever you're setting up your Azure tenant. A default directory has been set up from where you can manage authentication, your users, and all of the things. But the other thing is, if you have to manage the resources, you should have subscription. So what is subscription and how the subscription is different from the directory? We will understand that. Do we require the active subscription to log in into the tenant, or we can use the tenant without subscription? Azure subscription is like a billing account that allow you to use the Azure resources. It is a kind of let's take this is your account. Resources like virtual machine, storage, databases. You need at least one active subscription to access any resources like virtual machine, storage, or any resources in the tenant. And you do not need an active subscription to log in into your Azure tenant. A tenant is about managing users, apps, and identity. There is no cost involved for just logging in or managing the Azure AD. However, if you want to use the Azure services, for an example, if you want to create virtual machines, databases, you need a active subscription and you can link your subscription to your tenant. In a simple example, if I want to explain you tenant, let's assume as your company office floor where you can manage who works there and what apps are used. And subscription is like your utility bill which you can pay for electricity, water, and other resources used in it. So if you use any kind of resources, subscription will use to bill those, right? And for tenant managing everything, user thing, and everything, there is a different licensing used to manage users. Azure license, E5 license, and other licenses are used to provision those use Azure, so you can use the different services in Azure tenant. So if we look at the subscription, right now I have a Azure free trial subscription, and if I click on it, I can see that this is the subscription ID, and this is linked to my default directory which I have created. So my default directory is, if I go to the Entra ID, this is my default directory. So the conclusion is you can link the subscription to the directory and you do not need an active subscription to log in into your account. Subscription can only be used to bill your resources. For an example, using the virtual machine, how you can use the virtual machine, how long, what size, that kind of thing. Subscription is used to bill. Subscription is not necessary requirement for the tenant, but in nutshell, what the users are managing. Resources. For the resources, subscription is required. Let's understand this way. Let me just remove everything. So let's create this way. So this is your Azure cloud, and you have signed up in Azure and you will be assigned with a tenant. So you will be getting tenant inside the Azure. tenant, or you can say default directory. So under the tenant, you have a directory, right? Intra ID, which from where you can manage users, group, authentication, authorization, etc. And in the tenant, you can have multiple subscriptions. So let's take an example like this is your house, and these are the family members, are the users, and they must have an credit card. So subscription is like a credit card which is used to bill your resources. If your user uses any kind of resources in Azure, this subscription is used for billing on the basis of usage. So you can have multiple subscription in one tenant, and you can link the subscription with your directory. If any of the users or anyone in the cloud want to access the resources in Azure, these are the resources. Taking an example, resources in Azure that are VMs. If a user want to access the resource, any of the resource, this VM, storage, database, app service, any service in Azure are the resources. If a user want to use those resources, then user needs a subscription. So why subscription in a picture? If a user uses the VM on the basis of usage, subscription will bill to the users, right? So this is the scenario. That's how the subscription, your tenant, directory, and resources are available in Azure. So we have discussed about the subscription. Now we have some licenses in Azure as well. Licenses in Azure are like keys that unlock the access to the specific services for users. Without a license, a user cannot use the certain tools or features. So when you assign a license to a user, let's suppose we have assigned this license to the user, you are giving them permission to use the specific services like Microsoft 365 apps, Teams, OneDrive, Intune, or advanced security features in Azure Active Directory. So once you assigned the license to the user, users are getting the access to all these services. So why do we assign the license to the user? To access these services, Intune, Office 365 apps, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, and many others. Licenses tied to the user identity and access to the Azure AD service. and features like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and conditional access, and the services like Office 365 application, SharePoint, Teams, etc. So there are the different types of licenses in Azure. Example, Azure AD Free, Azure AD Premium 1, Azure AD Premium 2, Office license, E3 license, E5 license, and many more. I hope this session helped clarify the essentials. In the next video, we will dive into the Azure Identity and Management, exploring how to manage users' access and security within the Azure ecosystem. Stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights into the Azure. Let's recap what we understood in the last video.